Welcome everyone to the global webinar on how do we make our cities ethical. My name is Marta Fernandez. I'm the Executive Director at RMIT Europe, the university's hub in Barcelona. RMIT is a global university, but we are proud to have been founded on the land of the Wurundjeri people and the Kulin nations, the Aboriginal traditional owners of Melbourne. And whenever we meet in Melbourne, we say welcome in the Wurundjeri language and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and their elders past and present. So in that spirit, Wominjeka, welcome. Today's event examines how we can ensure our places and communities can remain fair as we see cities around the world transition to a low carbon future. And it's often the most vulnerable who are impacted by the effects of climate change, as well as the sometimes negative and unintended consequences of decarbonisation, from economic inequality to social exclusion. We're also seeing how COVID-19 recovery responses call for the world to come out of the pandemic in a green and clean way. But how do we ensure that the people who will benefit from this investment are those who most need it? This global webinar today will cover how cities can approach a decarbonised future in an ethically informed way, with a focus on citizen-led approaches for positive transformative change and inclusive urbanism planning, policy and decision-making. And I'm very pleased to welcome today's panelists to address these questions. Before I hand over to our first speaker, I would like to bring your attention to the event Q&A. And as we go along, please feel free to add your comments and questions and give the ones you would like to be answered a thumbs up, and we'll try to cover as many of these as possible during the Q&A. Now we're going to hear from our first speaker, Bárbara Pons Giner. Bárbara is the urban planning advisor to the Deputy Mayor of Barcelona and leads urban initiatives as part of the Barcelona Green Deal. She has experience both in the private and public sector, where she has held various public administration executive roles. Bárbara is an architect with a master in landscape architecture from Harvard University, specializing in particular in green infrastructure and sustainable urban planning. Currently, she's also part-time faculty at Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona. Over to you, Bárbara.
Thank you very much, Marta, and I am very, very pleased to be here in this forum talking about equitable cities organized by RMIT. I think it's going to be very interesting. So, because I only have 10 minutes to explain the Barcelona Green Deal I'm going to concentrate on the ethical or focusing on the equitable side of this economic plan, because it's the new economic agenda for Barcelona. I'm going to move on fast. So next slide, please. I'm going to go through I'm going to give you a hint of what the Barcelona Green Deal is about. I'm going to talk about the vision, 3 pillars and 10 objectives of this economic plan, how it transforms into a map of the city or a plan for the city, a vision for the city also, and then just a few examples of projects that deal with this perspective of the ethical or equitable approach to the economic development of the city. Next, please. So the vision of the plan, it comes from the Green Deal that the United States and Europe are focusing in, and we basically deal with the triple bottom line that any sustainable plan or approach has to deal with. Competitiveness, because we're talking about a new economic agenda for the city with a 2030 horizon. But we know that the collective progress won't be possible if we also care about sustainability, ecological sustainability, and fairness or social equity in the city. We know we are as vulnerable as our most vulnerable neighbor. We know that very well from the recent COVID experience, and we are trying to build the economic future of the city with this triple approach, balancing the 3 pillars. Next, please. So we have developed this around these 3 pillars of the strategy, 10 objectives. Here you can see the competitiveness. We have 4 concrete objectives. We have 3 for sustainability and 3 more for fairness or social equity. Next, please. And these are the three objectives. I won't go very deep into all of them, but basically we want to build ensuring the quality of work and employability of city residents. And we have a few projects that I highlighted here, how we care about the quality of employment. As Joe Biden say, we care about personal infrastructure. They are the basis of all the economy. So we want better employment and better wages for employees. New social clauses in recruitment. We care about the vulnerable collectives of the city, and we care that they are also integrated in the economy. And we are developing common meeting spaces between the business world and the world of work. So with all this new digital economy popping up with this global perspective, and sometimes being hard to deal with the employees' rights. Then we also protect the stability and security of the local economy. We know that local commerce and the local production of goods is also important after having all the global networks cut down for a few months during the pandemics. We know it's so important to produce things on site. And also local commerce for the city, they are the basis of the livability of streets, of downtowns, and we want to protect and ensure they do the function for a quality of life in our cities, building the 15-minute city. So we are helping them for the digital transformation of local shops and restaurants, so they can combine the on-site and the online worlds. We are working very closely to the local commerce, and we have we will see a very strong network of municipal markets that develop commercial axes around them. And we have also invested in economic recovery funds to help the businesses that had more difficulties over the last pandemics. And the third objective is growing and strengthening the fabric of social and solidarity economy enterprises and initiatives in Barcelona. Barcelona is leading many initiatives in this social economy, and we will talk briefly about this Barcelona Cooperative Hub in Can Batlló, in a former industrial site in Barcelona. And we have this Sharing Cities program for digitalization and platformization of local and small businesses. So next slide, please. But I am going to talk about the city, how this new economic agenda that combines these three pillars is building or improving the city. Barcelona has a DNA since the 19th century with the Cerdà plan. It's very well known to urban planners, but not only. We have this trinomial approach to urban planning with the planning laws, but also economy and social equity, very blended in. Also, public health has been a driver since the 19th century, and it is today also. So this is basically the geographical area where we are working, the sea, two rivers, and the Collserola Mountains behind. Next, please. Over the centuries, we have built many infrastructures that kind of develop the value and the economy, not only of the city, but the metropolitan region around it, the railway and road infrastructure, but also the port and the airport. Next, please. We are building now or rebuilding the green infrastructure that we need, because we know competitiveness, economic competitiveness needs talent, and we know talent needs both to develop local talent with equal opportunities to education for all citizens, but also to attract international talent. And international talent is attracted by sustainable infrastructures and habitable neighborhoods. So we are really building hard on the new superblock strategy. Also, it's not only an urban strategy, but also an economic strategy and also an ecological sustainability strategy. Next, please. We're also working on the housing. We have a housing emergency in Barcelona. We are trying to make more investment in refurbishing and helping being more ecologically efficient the old urban housing that we have in the city. So this is all the urban tissue that we're working on. Next, please. And this is as I was saying, a map of the red dots are the municipal markets. We have 40 municipal markets, almost one in every neighborhood, that develop commercial access around them. So they are the guarantee of this 15-minute city that has shown to be very sustainable and more ethical, helps the care city to be developed around these commercial areas, these proximity areas. Also, cities are more secure, more safe. around this when you have all this activity. And this is also one basic infrastructure for the equity and the livability of the city that we are taking care of. Next, please. And these are the global and like the connectivity poles and axis of the city. We have the airport, the port, and the two main high-speed train stations. One working now, Sans Sagrera, that will be working in the next years. And we have the littoral axis. Next, please. That this is where we want to develop this Barcelona Green Deal. The way to express it on the city, we have identified 5 economic transformation areas that are going to be developing towards the new economy with a 2030 horizon in the next years. These 5 areas also have leading projects that the City Council is promoting in these areas to kind of trigger synergies and new ways of collaborating with the local and existing economic agents and building this dynamism that is needed in the city. So next, please. I'm going to show just a zoom in on a couple of these areas, transformation areas. Here we have the Montjuic area. It's a huge park that has many cultural and sports facilities in it, but it wants to be transformed into an economic pole of the city also to combine the 2 activities. And here at the top of the image, we have this Can Batlló Cooperative Economy Promotion Center. It's an all-industrial site that the City Council is pushing for promoting this from the social economy activities. So we are aiming to have European funds to kind of push forward this. Sorry, is it my computer? Sorry, I had a message that I should add someone to the meeting. Sorry about that. Okay, so these are some of the main projects around the Green Deal is leading around this new transformation area of the city. Next, please. And this is the center of Barcelona, the downtown. And here we have a very specific strategy because the downtown was really damaged by the COVID crisis, because it was an area that in the last 2 decades was over-concentrating in tourism. The housing and the local commerce was too much oriented toward tourism. So when we have the COVID lockdown, basically the downtown, the Ciutat Vella district was dead. The streets were dead. Many commerce has been closing and they haven't reopened after the recovery. So we were very concerned about the problem, the economic dynamism of this area. So we are developing this reinventing the city center economy strategy. And we are pushing some new economy centers in some of the most emblematic buildings that have been emptied in the last few years. So the example that I want to talk about is the Correos building. It's the former post office headquarters in the city that right now is half empty. It's not in full capacity, and we are developing a public project to create. Next slide, please. To create a space for economic dynamism in the city, and also for neighbors to develop activities of reskilling and being able to connect to the new digital economy. So this is Via Laietana. This is the axis where this building is on. Next, please. Here below you can see we combine this project for a new activity pole in a building, but also with the refurbishing of the whole axis, because right now, as you could see before, that was a pre-COVID photograph. It had 5 car lanes and very narrow sidewalks and too much walking pedestrian activity that was not really well placed. So now we are refurbishing the city to reduce to 3 car lanes, a bike lane, and making wider sidewalks. And then also this is, you could see at the bottom left of the image, the Correos building, that it's really in this very important position in the city, right in the downtown of Barcelona, where we want to create this new project. Next, please. So this is the building. Now you can see the Via Laietana from a better perspective. So we want to transform this building into a hub of the digital economy, but also oriented to reskilling and education of especially the young people that in Spain in general, but in Barcelona we have a problem with unemployment in young people. So we want to have this second opportunity or this continuous education place where they can reorient their careers into the digital place. Also, we will create a hub for incubators and more consolidated companies where you create an ecosystem for all of them to create an economic pole in the city that has also attention to the citizens around and services for the local neighbors. Next, please. I am almost done. So this is some images from there are many, we did a benchmark. There's other initiatives in Europe that go towards the same direction to create right in places that are very touristic or have the pressure of every building to become a hotel or some tourist-oriented business. We want to create high quality employment and activities related to the knowledge economy in the middle of these urban environments. Next, please. And just to more or less to this, I leave you with this final view of because we have projects similar to this one in any one of these 5 areas. We have 2 industrial areas, the Zona Franca and the Besós industrial area, the green areas. Then we had the Montjuïc that I showed you before, and then the center that needs really this strategy to reinvent many of the facilities that are underutilized in the center. And then, of course, we have the 22 at Innovation and Creativity district that is also holding initiatives for the social economy and to kind of blend these synergies with new economic activities and the local residents and the local economy. And this is for you, the Barcelona Green Deal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bárbara. It's fantastic to hear about this initiative of the Barcelona Green Deal, but not only that strategy, but the reality of what you're actually implementing in Barcelona. And as you said, we're as vulnerable as our most vulnerable citizens. So great to see that fairness is one of the 3 pillars of that new strategy. And from RMIT Europe, as an international entity in Barcelona 22 at, we're really looking forward to seeing how we can engage with you in this initiative. And now I would like to welcome our next speaker, Jay Tompt. Jay is co-founder of the Totnes REconomy project. It's an initiative of transition town Totnes in the UK to inspire a new kind of economic regeneration that would create an abundance of opportunity for people to meet their needs, and to do so in ways that work with natural systems that are inclusive and fair and that generally increase the well-being of the entire community. Jay is also an associate lecturer in economics at Plymouth University, as well as a regular teacher on Schumacher's College postgraduate economic programs. Over to you, Jay.
Great, thank you very much. Huge honor to be included on this panel. Thank you for the invitation. And Bárbara, that was super inspiring. A lot of what you were talking about sounds amazing and sounds like a lot of the stuff that we would be teaching at Schumacher. In fact, I think I've got a handful of students who would love to talk with you about what you're doing. And I would love to come for a visit. So thanks for that. I have a bit of a tough act to follow. I wear a lot of different hats, and what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes is just some of what we've been doing through the REconomy project and another project that we set up in our region. And I guess the presentation is kind of structured a little bit like this. I'm going to talk about the what and the how, and then end on the why, which I think will help us link all of this to this this idea and the imperative to develop ethical cities. So we're working from the bottom up, basically with citizens. So you can click to the next slide. This is from one of the events that we do in the town, which is all about trying to kind of stir the pot and get people involved in local economic change in various ways that go beyond merely being a consumer. Click to the next slide, please. When we started the REconomy project in 2011, we began with the analysis that many of us have begun with, which is we have all these wicked problems affecting us globally, and more or less every single one is the result of the kind of economic system that we have. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is to change the economic system. So what can we do in our little town? Totnes is a town of about 8,500 people. Our region is, depending on how you measure it, 20,000 around our town, 1 million across our very, very big county. So we're not gonna shift the global system, but we can do things in our place, and this has been our focus. So it's citizen-led economic change, and it's primarily because there isn't enough change happening from other parts of society, including government. What are we looking for? Well, we're looking to create the kind of system that's fair and inclusive, just, that's ecologically wise, and results in a thriving social life, and as well as resilient and adaptive, because we will need to be dealing with some shocks, as we're already beginning to see. Click to the next slide, please. Essentially, our approach is informed by systems thinking. So this is the main question for us. How can we create the conditions for new economic actors, relationships, and models to emerge and flourish? So very often, I think when you look at grassroots initiatives, they're focused on maybe creating a cooperative that can grow, you know, like a strawberry plant. Or focus on one or two kind of discrete projects. And what we're trying to do is create the conditions for many such projects. And so some of how we approach that is, actually, you can click to the next slide. This is what it looks like. We love the gardening metaphors because they're so apt. So what we're trying to do is create lots of healthy soil, lots of nutrition, and lots of little creatures in the soil, lots of networks of connections, and then we can plant our seeds and grow our garden, so to speak. And so how this translates then for us in terms of kind of a strategic approach is, well, we need to have a different kind of entrepreneurial culture. We need to sort of mobilize the know-how and the social capital and the financial capital of the people around us, people in our place. We also need to build out enterprising ecosystems, so the spaces and the structures that can support new such actors. If you're in a bleak landscape, you look around and you see no possibility, but if you're in an abundant ecosystem, you see lots of possibility, and so this is what we're working for. So click to the next slide, please. And this is also what it looks like. So this is just a quick, tiny little story of one of the projects that we run. It's called the Local Entrepreneur Forum. Click, next. So this is an event where we bring everyone in the town, or as many as we can get together. We do open space and other ways of getting people to interact in ways that are low risk, that help to build confidence and increase participation. Next. And then we have 4 or 5 transition-oriented entrepreneurs pitch to the community, and the community then invests, and they might invest money, slow and patient capital, or they might invest expertise or other kinds of help. Maybe they'll even invest things or offer gifts that the people pitching didn't ask for. Like, hey, I love what you're doing. I'll bake you a cake. I'll give you a hug. And this kind of thing creates a different sort of culture, allows people to participate in different sorts of ways, and it kind of re-embeds that transformational process, that entrepreneurial process, that process of economic change in the community. Next slide, please. These are just a couple of our entrepreneurs. As I like to say, we don't need more Elon Musks. We need more people like Myrtle Cooper here, who's pitching to get support for her foraging business. Next slide, please. We've had all kinds of different businesses start up in our little town. Foraging business, as I mentioned, but also a brewery, several woodland projects, a couple of farms, all kinds of things. It's not just a sort of fringe hippie event, not at all. It's a serious event, and we've had really good success with it. Click to the next slide, please. This is just a little snapshot of one of the unexpected outcomes, which is how the little projects and the companies that have pitched have become networked together and have remained in a collaborative, cooperative kind of network. Click to the next slide, please. So we realized we're doing things in the town, we're super awesome. Hey, everybody, look at us, we're in Totnes. But that doesn't matter if the people around us aren't also transforming. So we began to look out at our region and try to find other people who were doing things, or to begin the process of spreading this work around the region. So we started doing what we called Devon Convergence events that were not unlike the Transformadora that happened in Barcelona last year and the year before. So using participatory methods, inviting people in, and really just looking to kind of stir the pot and get people to have conversations they wouldn't ordinarily have, to meet other people that they wouldn't ordinarily meet, and create the conditions for new sorts of collaborations. And it's been very successful. Click to the next slide, please. It led to a really big event that we did in lockdown. We were completely flummoxed by the lockdown, as many people were. We had wanted to do a big event. How do we do a big event when we can't meet? Well, we did it online. We took a big risk, and it was a huge success. It was unprecedented for us in our region. We had over 635 people attending, including people from local government, which was also unheard of. And I think, Brendan, you might be talking about climate emergency declarations. I think that helped to sort of prepare the ground for such participation from the public sector. But it was a solutionary kind of event. Still, the ripples are rippling, including a new downscaling the donut economics model for our region. Next slide, please. So I mentioned some of the outcomes from these events. The logo in the lower left, Southwest Mutual, this is a bank. So a mutual bank project came from one of our first convergence events. It created the conditions for lots of other new initiatives and relationships. The logo on the right is Local Spark. So this is something that popped up in one of these events. And I think you can click to the next slide. I was a bit premature there, but that's okay. So I'll come back to Local Spark in a second, but this again is just sort of a metaphorical picture. So in, say, 2015, that heart represents Totnes. This is where we are in South Devon, which is in the southwest of England, mostly a rural area. There are a couple of big urban areas. And if you click to the next, this is sort of the after picture. So after doing these events, we became super connected, and really we have a vibrant network throughout the county. Next, please. So back to Local Spark. So this popped up in Torbay, which is a deprived coastal city. We began working with these same methods over there, building a huge network of allies and collaborators. We launched a social enterprise network. We began building enterprising ecosystems across this urban area. But more importantly, we developed a really great relationship with the council. Councils in this country don't have a lot of power, but some have enough power to make some changes. And so our council has embraced the Community Wealth Building Program, which was made famous in Cleveland and then later in Preston. We've got a great relationship with them. We're on the Community Wealth Building Board. We're collaborating with them in lots of ways. And not only in that program, but in other programs too. So we've got it's very early days, but we've got lots of potential in Torbay to have the kind of collaborative relationship between citizens and pro-social, pro-environmental entrepreneurs and anchor institutions and the council. And we're just in the early days of really seeing what this kind of collaborative network can accomplish. Click to the next, please. So some of the lessons that we've learned, that these participatory convergences really work to build productive networks of citizens who are interested in doing things. It's a great way to share know-how, because we need to know how to actually do things. If we want to work in this way, then it requires some new skills, and so finding ways to share that know-how is important. All of this has been informed by our understanding of systems and complexity and how innovation works. And I think it's been working for us pretty well so far. Maybe it's a model that other people can follow, or I think other people are following it actually in their own ways. Can you click to the next? And this is my last slide. So this, I've just been talking about kind of the what and the how. Why are we doing it? Why are citizens motivated to make change? Well, I think for us it begins with this notion of divine discontent. People are motivated to take change because the world is, they look around and the world is screwed up. It's full of injustice, and this is what's motivating the people in our networks. Not only, there are also people who volunteer because they want to participate with other people, but they're not so aware of these bigger issues, or not so motivated by these bigger issues. So I have kind of an ambivalent feeling about this word volunteer, because very often it can be marginalized and minimized and depoliticized. So I think the citizens have a huge role to play in the emergence of more ethical cities. So if we look at city as a kind of localized polity, what we find is that it's full of bureaucratized systems, and I think this kind of creates the conditions for maybe situational evil. That maybe is too strong a word, but people get trapped in bureaucracies. So even though there are individuals who want to do the right thing, they're stuck in a system that won't allow them to do it. And the planning system in our country especially is an important part of limiting more ethical behavior and more ethical policy, I think. And in terms of thinking of city as a place, I think this is really about relationships and memories and sort of a commons. And this again is where citizens really have a huge role to play. And so I think what I like to think about anyway, in terms of the kind of new citizen we need to produce in all of this, is sort of borrowing from Plato, as philosopher citizens, people who are really informed and really step into that role of being a democratic citizen. So I probably have gone over a little bit. I'm sorry about that, but thank you very much.
Absolutely fascinating, Jade. Thank you so much for the fantastic presentation and this REconomy transformational project, and how it's been impacting the community in Totnes, and that citizen-led approach for economic change. And I take that, people are searching for those better solutions and simpler systems, and those bottom-up approaches that are conducive of doing the right thing and doing things right. So thank you. And as a small reminder to our audience, please add your questions to the Q&A and like other people's questions, as we'll be picking them up from there for the Q&A discussion. And now we'll be hearing from our next speaker, Professor Ralph Horn. He's Deputy Pro-Vice Chancellor, Research and Innovation in the College of Design and Social Context at RMIT University. Ralph is a geographer with a specific research interest in inclusive low-carbon urban transitions, housing and households. At RMIT, Ralph combines research leadership and participation in research projects concerning the environmental, social, and policy context of production and consumption in the urban environment. He's also a chief investigator for RMIT as a partner in the European funded research project Cultural E, which is contributing on the social and cultural aspects of energy positive buildings. And he's research leader for RMIT Europe too. So over to you, Ralph.
Thank you, Marta, and thanks to Bárbara and Jay for those really inspiring talks. And I can't help commenting using some of my few minutes on the kind of the pitch and of the two presentations we've already heard. You know, Bárbara is focused on equity and sustainability in city economic planning, and if you like, talking about, well, government-led initiatives for local economic development in Barcelona, while Jay talks about bottom-up initiatives, new entrepreneurship, acting locally, despite inaction from government. You could sort of see the way I've described those, that they're quite different, but both equally legitimate and highly worthwhile, in fact, critical, in my view. So my contribution is to try to sort of prompt some thinking about how we might reflect on such initiatives and to provide a bit of a kind of framework for continuous assessment, reflection and improvement in our initiatives towards just low carbon futures. And that framework is for kind of what I'd call ethical city projects. And this is really about the central theme of the book that Brendan will talk about shortly after my bit. I guess the starting point for this would be to say, you know, for me, the concept of the ethical city is presented as an antidote to popularism, individualism, tribalism, nationalism, and the kind of fatalism associated with the acceptance of humans as cruel or capitalism as inevitable. And I think instead, the kind of ethical city calls for an active orientation towards equity, restorative justice, transparency, accountability, environmental sustainability, as well as, of course, climate justice. And so what I mean by ethical city projects are projects that provide sustainability, tackle inequality, and eliminate poor governance or corruption. In other words, the lack of equity of voice. And I've put "and" in that slide in red twice because for me, they come as a package. And that, I think, is a central point that I want to make. And in fact, I'll go further and say that cities that fail to do this will quite quickly become less attractive, more vulnerable, and more antisocial. And these urban processes are kind of, they have their own cadence and they can be really quite rapid. So I could see the decline of cities. In fact, we can already see the decline of cities around the world that are not engaging. And sitting in Melbourne right here, right now, in a country which has a woefully poor climate policy, I can forecast the decline of Australian cities and their economies if that policy position continues into the future. So maybe the next slide, please, and I'll just give a bit of an example. For me, the photovoltaic or solar panel transition in Australia is kind of remarkable, and in essence, it's the country that has had the highest rate of installs of domestic solar panels over the last decade, outstripping Germany, Japan, and other countries that we think of as being leaders in this space. It's just to a large extent a success story on paper in terms of a technical or socio-technical transition, but there's a dark side to this transition. It's not a smooth and successful low carbon transition. If you go to the next slide, if we look slightly behind this, we find that, as in many other jurisdictions, it's been funded through a carbon obligation on electricity supply organisations. So what have they done to buy these credits, which has made PV installs, in fact, affordable for homeowners? Well, they've upped the price of electricity for everybody. So if I'm not going to go into the details of explaining this, but really it's just to illustrate that if you are a tenant and therefore you can't get access to solar panels, and perhaps you're on a low income, your electricity bills have gone up. But you get none of the benefits of these panels. So you're actually paying for owner occupiers who are perhaps on increased earnings and can co-fund these panels, feeling better about themselves, making contribution, and actually being financially better off as a result. This is a classic case of an environmentally driven policy that looks successful on the surface. You can walk around the city of Melbourne and see the panels on people's roofs. The reality is it's being paid for disproportionately by low-income households. So I would say that if we kind of look at the social structures and the economic structures of society when we're designing these kind of low carbon initiatives, we might design them differently. And that's my argument really for ethical cities, is that I feel that when we see that there's an unequal housing system sitting behind this with unequal tenure, unequal incomes, and a flat policy set which really doesn't recognize that unevenness, what we end up with is uneven outcomes. And so I would say this leads us to the big question about what sorts of deep changes, how are we going to make the kinds of deep changes required to reconfigure our cities along more ethical city lines. And I would say the principles of the ethical city are not kind of a blueprint or an endpoint. It's an alignment, a trajectory, a way of thinking, an orientation. It describes a kind of position that exhibits respect for human and non-human rights, for social inclusion and for dignity. And I think it's aligned to the idea of the ethical citizen, but in fact, it's around an understanding, a political awareness, and about building this political awareness across broader population, not just amongst advocates, thinkers, and policymakers. And I see it as a kind of antidote to the rise of anti-multiculturalism and parochialism in an era of kind of Brexit, and let's hope Trump has gone. But you know, it's a reaction to the neoliberal project and the institutions of globalization. So for me, the ethical city is also very much an aware city, a hopeful city, and quite an ambitious city. And we are now, I think, through the examples we just heard, thinking about what is the common language, the framework, the way in which we stand back and look at these ethical city projects and link them together in coherent ways. I think the Sustainable Development Goals offer a kind of common language and a legitimacy, if you like, a framework. We need many more of these, a kind of common language for us to act at the kind of ethical city level and to be able to create ethical city projects. And I'll finish on that point. I mean, I really think that if we can develop these tools to reflect and think, we can actually continuously improve those projects that we've heard about today as we go forwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ralph, and thanks for sharing your view on this framework for ethical cities project for a low carbon future. And you mentioned these urban processes that need to be sustainable, tackle inequality, and eliminate poor governance. And great examples to illustrate that on what's happened with renewable energy. I mean, in Spain, just recently, peak, our electricity bill has increased by 40%, and you can see how that is actually a tax across the whole of society that is going to have impact on increasing energy poverty, because it's landed on everyone in the same level. So thanks for bringing that up, and that way of thinking that we need to develop on more values oriented. Well, like we have value-based organizations, we want to have value-based cities as well. And our final speaker is Professor Brendan Barrett. He's specially appointed professor at the Center for the Study of Co-Design at Osaka University in Japan. And at Osaka, he teaches science communication and documentary filmmaking, and he holds visiting faculty positions at the RMIT School of Media and Comms and the UN University Institute for the Advanced Study of Sustainability. Brendan is an urban planner by training and actually former colleague at Arup, and his research interests include ethical cities, accelerated decarbonisation pathways, urban energy transition, and local environmental management. Over to you, Brendan.
Thanks, Marta. I get the pleasure of promoting our book here. Ralph, John and I have been working on this for about 6 years. We're bringing together lots of ideas, and it's really interesting because I think we find ourselves in an ethical boom right now. But as co-authors, we were discussing at the beginning that this ethical boom is very much about individual ethics. And actually, Ralph made a real clear point at the beginning of the project, is that generally what happens around individual ethics is you're made to feel guilty for not doing your share of the work. So we were actually thinking that through this book, what we put the emphasis on is collectivist ethics. And that actually what we really need to see within cities, within communities, is then communities working together, people working together to decide what is the future of the city, what ethical values are most important for each city. So that's our starting point. Let's move to the next slide, please. We recognize that there are many different types of cities, and for instance, Bárbara mentioned that there's this competition going on between cities and that you have to compete. But there's also discussion around urban livability. The Australian cities put a lot of emphasis on urban livability. Osaka was the second most livable city in the world, according to the Economist Intelligence Unit. But I put Barcelona in with a group of other cities. Jay mentioned Preston and Cleveland. I put Barcelona in with the fight back cities, with the fearless cities, with the ethical cities. And actually it's interesting that as we're talking, there is a Fearless Cities conference going on, organized by Barcelona, which I've been participating in very late at night. So there's some interesting discussions, and they all seem to connect into the notion of the ethical city. Next slide, please. The big thing to recognize is, yes, we'll be out of the COVID pandemic soon, but we have other disruptive forces that are happening. Climate change is there. We have economic insecurity that we don't know how that will play out in the future. We have future pandemics. We have technological changes that are impacting greatly. So I think it's really important to see ourselves in an era of relentless disruption and to embrace that, and to embrace it as a potential transformative force. So what I want to do is to give some examples of how we might be able to free up resources to actually help communities do the right thing and implement the change that they want to see. So the next slide, please. I think one of these really important forces that's been heavily influenced by the pandemic and the impact it's had is the universal basic income. And what you'll see is that there are so many examples popping up now. So there's proposals in Wales and Scotland, in the UK, and this map is actually showing the initiatives that are emerging across the United States. And I know also there's thinking about UBI in Spain, and actually there's been an experiment in Barcelona for 2 years, from 2017 to 2019. There's often, there's two sides to this. There's people who think this is a fantastic idea, some who think it is basically not the right solution. But I think what we need is more experimentation. And what UBI can do is provide the security that is really important for communities to bring about change. Next slide, please. Jay has already mentioned this. I think community wealth building is a very, very important tool for cities to adopt across the world. For instance, in the case of Preston, by redirecting procurement flows of anchor institutions, they were able to inject another £74 million into the local economy. That was money that was just leaking out of the economy. And I think this applies to cities in general. Cities all too easily allow money just to evaporate. And I think really focusing on how those funds can be redirected to help support the city is going to be really important from here on, because resources are limited. So how do you maximize them? But it's interesting to see councillors talking about community wealth building as being part of building ethical, healthy and resilient local economies going forward. And next, if you go to the next slide, I think this is really interesting as well, which also ties into this sort of digital economy and the cashless society. But taking advantage of digital local currencies is really important. So for instance, from Bristol in the UK, they recognise that £60 million is spent each year on e-transactions. So if you're using your Google Pay card, your Visa, your Apple Pay, there's a charge. And what Bristol is trying to do through Bristol Pay is redirect those funds back to supporting local actions. So they want to redirect it towards their Sustainable Development Goals plan. They want to promote behaviours and have a token system that also reinforces that. And they also want to see Bordeaux Pay, Manchester Pay, Barcelona Pay. I know that actually during the Universal Basic Income experiment in Barcelona, there was a digital citizen currency. And I think that's another example of Barcelona leading the way. But again, I think go back and try again and implement more of these experiments. Next slide, please. And these are just some other examples, I think, that tie into Barbara's presentation on the Green Deal priorities. I think there's lots and lots of tools that we can use. And it's interesting to note that Barcelona also has a participatory budget project running right now. And I found out that there's about 70 plus citizen proposals that have come forward, and it amounts to something like 30 million euros that could be invested in neighborhood improvement projects. Again, this is a fantastic innovation. And what I see happening here is resources going to communities and people taking control. And I think that's important as we go forward from here. But there's some interesting ideas that also come from Barcelona around technological sovereignty and putting people in charge of platforms, digital platforms, which I think is quite unique and highly influential. And finally, my next slide, I think we really need to look at the shift towards the net zero carbon future as a positive development. And it's a pathway to recovery. And this is actually from my hometown, Leeds, in England. But what I'm absolutely impressed by the approach that city is taking. So firstly, they are much more ambitious than what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is telling us to do, in that they're seeking to become net zero carbon by 2030. And then they have a whole scheme of very detailed measures explaining how they'll get there. And then the next slide, please, which is my final slide. What I think is really interesting and how they're going forward on this is that they are showing how these investments bring about major benefits for the city. So for instance, that the energy bill going net zero carbon quickly reduces the energy bill by something like £651 million. And in addition to that, they create 15,000 years of extra employment. So rather than seeing the climate emergency as a drain on our economy, they have transformed this into a very, very positive, forward-looking way of, well, let's create jobs. Let's put climate action at the heart of our recovery. So I think if more cities follow this example, then it could be truly transformative. And I think it is fundamentally ethical, because it's about not doing harm to the environment. It's about creating jobs, creating opportunities, and being good stewards of the planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brendan. Excellent to hear about the book and a snippet of some of the examples that you, Ralph Horn, and John Finn have compiled to help provide that reflection and a framework on how we make our cities ethical, and how, as you point in your last slide, it can guide a road of recovery in a net zero way. So now we're going to be commencing with the Q&A, and thank you very much for the questions as we've been going along. I would also invite our speakers to address them in the Q&A stream, but maybe we can start a bit referring to what Ralph mentioned earlier in his intervention, linking the presentation of Bárbara and Jay. How can we actually link local action and government action in ways that can enable that low carbon transition? So Bárbara, would you like to comment on this first?
Yes, actually, I didn't explain much about how the bottom-up initiatives can or have been incorporated to the Barcelona Green Deal. But as Brendan was saying, Barcelona in the last 6 years, the city council government has really experimented a lot and pushed many of these initiatives. It's one of the lines that the mayoress Ada Colau, very, very clear in this sense. And of course, it is a process of trial and error. We have this discussion. I belong to the economic promotion department, and we sometimes have these tensions when you really need to incorporate this more mainstream economy that is also suffering. I'm thinking about, for example, tourist sector, hotel owners, staff that have been suffering in the last year and a half, and then you have to make them discuss and agree in initiatives with the neighbors' concerns. And so it's always, we know the cities are spaces of conflict because there's so many people living around them. So yeah, I think this is really the topic for the future of municipal politics. I am happy that you raised this question. As far as the Barcelona Green Deal, of course, the Barcelona Green Deal is developed in 65 initiatives. Some of them are these projects, and each one of these projects has its own participatory process. Brendan didn't mention, we also have this platform that it's called Decidim Barcelona. It's Barcelona We Decide, where we share many of these projects, and there's the main decisions very often are shared with the neighbors. One of the problems we have also is that some initiatives are more participated than others, and you may find that in the end only maybe a few hundred citizens participated over a very important decision. So we also are learning how to balance these participatory processes. But yes, we are very careful in incorporating this thing. And the other innovation that Barcelona did was we made this conference. It was in April this year. It was the first big working conference or event after the lockdown. It was called Barcelona React. It was it was to discuss the economic agenda. Actually, it was to share this Barcelona Green Deal with the economic and social actors of the city and citizens also, and also with international experts to kind of keep on building this project and keep on getting input from that. And it was discussed there that Barcelona has also in its DNA this asking for forgiveness better than asking for permission in order to do things. So we tried and made probably some errors, but we are learning in the way. And I think that's also an important learning for municipal governments. But I think right now in the 21st century and with the main global conflicts, we all know, or many municipal governments know, that they really need to move forward for collective progress with also counting on bottom-up initiatives, trying to coordinate with them.
Great, thank you very much, Bárbara, for that perspective. And Barcelona has been in many cases an exemplar of that participation. I love how people always give their opinions through their balconies as well. You know, you always have a contribution and visibility of that. So Jay, would you like to comment as well?
Well, yeah, maybe I'll say a couple things. Bárbara, you make it sound so easy. I think so many people are inspired by what's happening in Barcelona, and unfortunately, many other places are far behind in terms of their political systems and political cultures, and that's certainly the case here in Britain. Many of us point to Preston as being an exemplar, and again, that's a very singular case in many ways. I think one of the issues in this country anyway is the lack of trust. And I think this also contributes to some of the populism, the right-wing populism that's happening, is people don't trust government, they don't trust politicians. And so in order to create the conditions for cooperation, I think there has to be some credibility building among the political classes. We're far from that in this country, although there are local places that are doing it. In our case, in Torbay, the new council of the last couple of years, which is kind of center-left a little bit, has invested quite a lot in trying to build trust, and it's beginning to work. The other thing, I think, at least in this country, is very often people get involved in community organizing and political organizing, and they're constantly saying, well, we should ask the people what they want. And I liked what you said, Bárbara, about asking forgiveness. We need more of that kind of thing. So if you've been elected to do something, and you don't need to keep asking people what to do. That's a total cop-out. When you ask people what they want, generally it's pick up the dog poo, fix the potholes, and in the case of Cumbria in this country, open a new coal mine. So it's a bit tricky. So I think there needs to be some work to develop the kind of political culture that can enable effective democratic kind of participation from the ground up.
Thank you very much, Jay. And maybe Ralph, would you like to comment on this question as well, on how we can reconcile that local action and government action?
Look, I can only agree wholeheartedly with both Bárbara and Jay's comments. Maybe what I will do instead, try to add some value in here, would be to comment on what I think are ways of thinking about the value of these projects. So I think we are all, and I will talk about myself then, conditioned to think about projects as kind of material artifacts, what's going to be left at the end of it, number of jobs, number of, within that project as a kind of normative idea. But what actually happens, of course, is projects change the way in which we relate to each other, the way in which we think about things, the words that we use, the language, the discourse, what's right, what's okay, what can be talked about legitimately. And one thing I didn't mention in my 6 minutes before was that is hugely positive about that photovoltaic transition, is that now it is quite acceptable for people of any political persuasion to talk about how legitimate it is to have solar panels on your roof. That has completely changed. So it's not so much, and yes, I may regret the way in which that's happened and the inequalities have been created. But the reality is it's led to things that which weren't really intended consequences. What happened, I'm sure, was somebody thought we really need to drive some of this activity and end up with this kind of infrastructure. But it's actually far more than physical material infrastructure. So I think one thing for us to do in our reflective moments of thinking about these projects and what is happening in Barcelona is not happening just now. It's happening as a result. It's been enabled by a whole set of long-term, some going forward, some going backwards, depending on which way you look at it. What I would call, city building initiatives, relations, and so on. So it's what can happen in Barcelona is a product, not just of the energy of Bárbara and others right now, but that's a kind of long-term consequential thing. And in fact, the possibilities are quite difficult to predict of how these different kind of discourses, currents, understandings come together. What we need to do, I think, is be very vigilant, look out for the opportunities, be very entrepreneurial, if I can use that term, and I like the way Jay used it before, be very entrepreneurial, take that word back from a negative connotation and be alert to what the opportunities are to shape the dialogue, shape the discourse, and think about how we can harness in effect, the opportunities that come out of projects at city level and learn from them quite honestly. So I sort of think it's thinking about the shadows and the things that we don't normally focus on when we're thinking about positive change towards low carbon futures, where there's sort of little pots of gold there that we can take and use on our next project.
Great, thanks for the comment, Ralph. And as you've raised the topic of entrepreneurship, I'm interested as well. We talked about this bottom-up approach as citizen. We've talked about the top-down, the local government, but how about industry? We've mentioned Jay was referring to entrepreneurs and the people that are actually the change makers that are coming up with their ideas, but how about the private sector, and what role do they have to play now that all of them have ESGs front of mind in their company policies? How do we make sure that there is establishment of a relationship with industry sector, with the private sector that is long term and has an impact? Brendan, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because when we've done past events on ethical cities, there's been this concern that, oh, this is something for citizens, this is something for local governments. But at the first event that we organized, we brought in a group called Ethical Reading, which is really interesting. It's another UK town, but it's an ethical cities initiative driven by business. And I mean, they have a clear notion, and so I recommend you take a look at it, but they have a clear and somewhat limited notion of where they're starting, which is like, let's clean up our operations from an ethical perspective. Let's do ethical recruitment practices. Let's think about ethical procurement and so on. But what's really interesting is how that it's gone from just a company to company relationship to really think about, well, how can we help the city? And that's where I think that businesses can play a very, very important role by determining what strengths they can bring to the table and how they can engage with local government and with the communities to move the city forward from an ethical dimension, and that also their roots are there, so that they are heavily rooted in Reading, and therefore they have a responsibility to contribute to the future of Reading. I think we have a bit of a disconnect in that many, sort of local companies have been eaten up over time by big companies. I remember there were a couple of breweries in my town which are now part of the Heineken group. Talking to Heineken is much more difficult than talking to a local brewery, unfortunately. So we also need to try to get even the big transnational corporations and their branches to have local roots. And if we can do that, then I think business can start to make a much more important contribution to the vitality of their cities. So they don't just see it as a place where they have an office, they see themselves as having a communal role to play. And I think that's what's happening in Reading is a really interesting beginning, and it will be great to see how that plays out in the future.
Thank you very much, Brendan. I take on that comment you made on the role that the companies have not only to drive their own ethics, but to make sure they have an impact in their locality and interweaved with the city where they have a presence. So can I ask Bárbara, how are you bringing private sector into that Green Deal initiative and how you're mobilizing?
Yeah, I wanted to add to this discussion about also the word entrepreneurship and some of the vocabulary, prejudice that we may have because that's something that has been some kind of a big learning for the city council government of Barcelona, because when Mayor Ada Colau came in 2015, it was a totally different economic moment in Barcelona. It was really, we were going up. The tourist sector was really pressing on the city. We had Airbnb growing exponentially every year. So and there was this housing emergency in the city. So basically, the policies, the first couple of or 2 or 3 years of the city council were stopping down, and it was contradictory because we put in place many participatory processes, but very often these private companies wouldn't be invited to participate. So it was kind of, contradictory. We wanted the citizens and the social sector to participate, but sometimes big companies didn't feel, or big commercial associations were not invited to participate in the same dialogues, or were invited but didn't feel comfortable. There was kind of a clash. And of course, it was the real estate sector that kind of felt very aggressively managed by the mayors. So they began to create conflict with that. But then suddenly COVID came, everything was stopped, the economy was stopped, and suddenly the city council found that we needed to change completely the approach with private companies, because now the conversation was totally different. We needed to we couldn't stop anymore all these sectors. We needed to work with them to reactivate the city, because the chain reaction to unemployment and any other things was so strong, and it was so frightening that the discussion changed completely. So now we have a much more constructive relationship, especially with the real estate sector, because also the housing team realized that in the previous 4 years, not much housing was done, because housing is mostly built by the private sector. The social, the public sector couldn't really push as much. So we needed the collaboration. So now I think by learning and by trial and error, we are really building a much more interesting platform to discuss with them. We find that many companies now, of course, they have the SDGs as a, like, even if it's greenwashing, at least they know what they are, and especially ecological sustainability is in their objectives. We have had conversations, for example, with Amazon, that is going to create a big center in Barcelona, and we are trying to how it should be an Amazon center in Barcelona, whether we have electrical vehicles, whether you work with the local commerce. I don't know, it is a challenge, but what we cannot do is to avoid the conversation with them. So we are trying to and not be afraid of this word entrepreneur. We have also in Barcelona a very strong tissue of social economic entrepreneurs that are building, sustainable food and with social concerns, little commerces, little companies, also with recycling and the circular economy. And they are businesses. They want to have, a sustainable profit in order to survive. So we are working on this conversation. In the Barcelona New Deal, all economic sectors were invited for discussion in the previous elaboration process, and now in any of the different projects or plans that are evolving from the New Deal, of course, they are participating. And I don't want to make it seem simple, because it is not simple. Usually you have a conflict of interest in many things, but we are always, that the frame is very simple if you put in place that you need to be ecologically sustainable, and you need to be equitable and pay fair wages to your workers. And we are, that's like the red baseline in order to keep on the conversation.
Okay, thank you very much, Bárbara, for that, and for sharing again that perspective of how Barcelona is doing it. And we have time for one final comment, or perhaps a piece of advice from each of you in 3-4 words about what would be your message on all of those cities that are grappling with these issues, that are thinking about what fantastic example has Jay presented, but we want to scale that up. What would be your key message, Jay?
There are no easy answers. That's one. All of this is complex, it's messy, and we need to embrace that messiness, and be willing to make mistakes. And so, I've been really inspired by what all the other presenters have talked about. I guess one big takeaway is that we're all citizens of somewhere. And I think maybe this is what's motivating some of the businesses in Reading, and maybe also in Barcelona and other places. We're all citizens, and if we had that attitude that we're all citizens of the earth, maybe, and as well as our places, that would maybe bring us back to more of that sort of moral philosophical attitude that Adam Smith assumed. And so that's my big takeaway.
Thank you very much, Jay. Ralph?
I mean, I think upscaling is a perennial problem. It's something I'm preoccupied with. Again, like Jay, there's no easy answer, there's no blueprint, there's no model. What I will say, though, is social change can happen incredibly rapidly. It's something that incumbents who are committed to maintaining the status quo of inequality are terrified about. And we've seen it happen before. We've seen sudden ructions happen, and changes to kind of Western civilization or whatever as we know it. So the possibilities are endless and they're very immediate. And I think the groundswell of community sentiment around the need to act on the climate emergency is a genuine and huge opportunity for social change. And I wouldn't underestimate the pace at which that change could gather. My concern is more wasted energy and cul-de-sacs, that we attempt things, don't really think or reflect quite enough on it, and before we know it, we end up in a place that we didn't intend to, and we have unforeseen inequalities or unsustainabilities creeping into the system. So my appeal would be for us to do that in concert between academia and practitioners, working together on helping to make sense of everything as we go along.
Thank you. Brendan, any final comments from you?
Yes, one thing I think we need to take care of is the notion of trying to get back to normal after COVID. I think that would be a huge mistake if we sort of come out of COVID and say, oh, great, we can get back to the way things were beforehand. I actually think we need to embrace this opportunity, and that, as we've talked about today, there are lots of examples of experimentation going on. We need to learn from those examples, and I think we also need to use this period, post-COVID period, as an opportunity to actually accelerate the transformation. It's not without risks, as Ralph points out. So we have to be very clever and strategic of how we take this forward. But again, I think this fearlessness is probably at the heart of that. We really need to think carefully of what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to get there. But let's not miss this chance.
Thank you. Bárbara, any final word from you?
Yes, I just wanted to share this reflection that I think from the position of cities, or not only from municipal governments, but the, you know, like the citizens that make cities and all the social agents. I think it's the framework to really build, because there is no one solution fits all. It's I think it's all about dialogue and balance, and cities are this ground where all this conflict happens, and we need to dialogue in the end. And I think they are the places where we can combine the three scales that are needed in order to have sustainable human environments. The global scale, because the main challenges we're dealing with today are global: climate change, global inequalities from these, these unicorns in Silicon Valley that are taking all the value from the local commerces, etc. So we need to deal that in a global context. Then we have the metropolitan scale, which is from the urban-rural divide, and how we connect these rural environments closer to the urban centers and how we coexist in a more balanced way. But also the local and the 15-minute city, and how we make more livable environment at the local scale, and we work with neighbors face to face and building or listening to each other at the local scale. I think the solutions, or the more strong solutions, may come from balancing these three scale approaches. And I think today we discussed very interesting initiatives in different scales, and I think the combination, and also the combination of listening to everyone and then acting, but also sometimes acting and then asking for forgiveness and learning again. So not asking permission every time. I think that combination and that balance is also very necessary.
Thank you very much, Bárbara. We will leave it here. It's been absolutely fascinating, very inspiring presentations, and we really take that city leaders need to be putting in place governance and systems and processes to ensure that decisions that are made in the spirit of driving the low carbon transition are not driving inequality or generating unintended consequences, and that the cities are really critical actors on paving the way to this transformation, given how close they are to the people and the opportunities they have to engage the community and develop solutions in partnership with citizens, which is something that national governments many times struggle to do. So this localization of the SDGs and the concept of ethical cities is a cornerstone to see cities advancing on the implementation of the UN agenda. So this element of good governance, transparency, public trust building, and fairness is critical to drive these more sustainable, resilient, and vibrant and inclusive city centers. So thank you very much to our speakers. Thanks to our fantastic audience for all your questions and comments throughout the event. And thanks to my colleagues at RMIT Europe for putting together this event. Please take a moment to share your feedback on today's webinar using the link that you'll see in the Q&A. And you can also register in that form to receive an attendance certificate. So thank you all once again for joining us today.
Thank you.